Hi, Mario here. So I was just at the park up the way with my two dogs, Sheba and Solomon, and there were these two kids that decided to play with him. And then not long after, there were another four children that wanted to play, and I was teaching them, how to do the commands, how to properly get them to do what you want them to do. Now, most of the little kids, little ones, I kind of taught them the drop it command so that they can pick up the ball and the dog will drop it, no problem, and then they can pick up the ball and throw it. Now, the older kids, I ended up teaching actually how the commands work because the older kids were the ones who were getting the more difficult commands. They wanted to know some of the cooler commands like speak. In the fact that I can go like that and say speak, and the dog will just bark, which is really cool, especially for children and people who are afraid of dogs, because then you have a power of making the dog actually bark on command. It's a very empowering um, command. So I taught the children how to speak, but it was interesting because one of the children didn't quite understand how it was going to work because they couldn't understand why no matter what they kept saying speak and doing the action, it wasn't going to work. And I finally used the analogy of homework, and she's like, okay. And I said, look at it this way: if your mom says, here's a piece of candy, do your homework, and then hands you the piece of candy, are you going to do your homework? They go, no, because you already got my piece of candy. And I said, exactly. I said, now, if mommy shows you this piece of candy and says, go do your homework, and puts the candy in front of you, what are you going to be thinking about? Your homework or your candy? And the older one's like, well, the candy, because it's right in front of you. And I said, exactly. So, the ball is the reward. So you show it to them and then you put it away. Then you get them to do their homework. What is the action you want? You want her to speak. So then you do the action. And the girl's light bulb went on like, oh my god, I get it. It was as if she was learning consequences for the first time. Action consequences. You want something done, but there's a couple of steps that have to be achieved before you can meet the goal. And it's understanding the steps in between. It can't go from point A to point Z. And this child immediately woke up and was like, oh, I get it. So I said, and I told her, I said, it's just like raising kids. You got to teach them right from wrong. You got to teach them, in steps. Everything happens in baby steps until you get, to the point where they're grown ups. And dogs have the mental capacity of a 2-year old. They really do. That you can get them to do a hell of a lot of things if you take the time to teach them. Just like a child has the potential to do anything they want if you take the time to show them. Now, then a few minutes later, mom comes over. Strange man playing with children. I get it. I understand. I have no problem with it. So she comes over. She approaches me. How are you? And I say, oh, I'm good. I'm like, these are your kids. She goes, yeah. These ones are mine. I said, oh, that's great. I'm like, those two are mine. And I point to the dogs. And the interesting thing is that she's like, she's watching the dogs play. She's like, you have good dogs. I said, well, thank you. And she's like, they're really well behaved. And I said, well, thank you. And I said, come here, Sheba, come here, Saul. And they both come over, and I had them drop the ball. I grabbed the ball, and I said, you check out these commands. And I showed her all her tricks in her book. And she's like, wow, how do you do that? And I said, I told her the same thing as I told her daughter. It's just like children. You teach them right from wrong. You teach them, what is appropriate, what isn't. And it was as if I was talking to a blank wall. Like, she didn't get it. And it was no surprise. It was absolutely no surprise. And I was like, I'm starting to understand this dynamic, this new society. And the parallels can be drawn very, very easily. I mean, you have to get from point A to point B, but there's a couple steps here in between. And you have to teach, dogs and children right from wrong. And there's there's a big social parallel. And I think I'm doing my part, with my two dogs and my niece and my nephew. When they're in my charge, you better believe they're saying, please, thank you, yes, yes, and no, not yeah and nah. Ugh. Where are the children learning this yeah and nah from? It's gross. It's disgusting. Yes and no. Thank you very much. So those types of things, I think, are lost on this next generation. I worry, but I feel that I guess conservative, because I have I guess you can want to say they're older conservative principles. They really are. This idea of respect, of teaching right from wrong at a young age to get them to and learning how actions and consequences work with steps in between. I think that is does more for the next generation than this passivity, because I'm probably betting that the same people that argue that these dogs are vicious and this breed is vicious and this, there's a horde, they advocate for the horrible, not advocate, but what's the word? They admonish, I guess you will, or they scream out, these animals are uncontrollable, blah 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 blah, are the same people that pretty much scream the same thing about the children. But the reality is if you don't have parents to guide the children, it's not, you're gonna have wild animals. And the reality is we have a lot of wild animals running around our society because they weren't raised. That's the truth. That's as I see it. So, talk to you later.